My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I turned the tables on those who sought to destroy me. I had been married to James for 5 years. At first, our marriage was beautiful, filled with love and laughter. He treated me like a queen, and I gave him my heart without hesitation. But something changed. Slowly, I started noticing the coldness in his eyes, the way his brothers would stop talking when I entered the room, and the suspicious phone calls he would take late at night. At first, I ignored the signs. I convinced myself that I was overthinking, that marriage had its ups and downs, and that whatever was happening was just a phase. But deep down I knew. One fateful evening I was walking down the hallway when I heard whispers coming from the living room. I stopped listening. The voices belonged to James and his brothers, Richard and David. My heart pounded as I tiptoed closer, standing just behind the curtain where they couldn't see me. "Everything is in place," Richard whispered. "Once Sarah is out of the house, the new wife will move in. She's already preparing." My breath hitched. A new wife. My head spun, but I forced myself to stay quiet. "Good," James replied, his voice cold. "She has no idea what's coming. He still thinks I love her. By the time we're done, she'll have no choice but to leave." My blood turned to ice. My own husband, the man I had sacrificed everything for, was planning to replace me like a worn-out piece of clothing. Worse, his brothers were in on it. They laughed, their voices thick with mockery as they continued plotting my downfall. "We'll make life unbearable for her," David added. "She'll beg to leave. And when she does, everything will be ours." I covered my mouth to silence my gasp. So that was the plan. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted everything I had built with James. My mind raced. How long had they been planning this? How long had I been sleeping beside a man who was waiting for the right moment to throw me away? I felt rage boiling within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. If they thought I was weak, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I took a deep breath and stepped back from the curtain, my heart pounding with a new kind of determination. I would not break. I would not crumble. If they wanted to play a game, then so be it. But I would be the one to win. I did not confront them immediately. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I put on a smile, pretending I was still the naive, loving wife they thought they could deceive. I cooked their meals, served them with a gentle voice, and even massaged James's shoulders like nothing was wrong. But behind my sweet smile, I was making plans of my own. I observed them carefully, taking note of their every move. I noticed how James would disappear at odd hours, how Richard would smirk at me whenever I walked past, and how David would whisper and snicker whenever I was around. They thought they were winning. They thought I was clueless. But they were wrong. One evening, as I set the dinner table, James wrapped his arm around my waist and kissed my cheek. It felt empty, like a rehearsed act. "Sarah, you're such a wonderful wife," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "I don't know what I would do without you." I smiled, forcing warmth into my voice. "And you never have to find out, my love." Inside I was seething. The nerve of him. But I played along, serving them their food, laughing at their jokes, pretending I didn't know that every smile they sent my way was laced with deceit. That night, when James fell asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Confronting them wasn't enough. Leaving wasn't an option either. I had given everything to this marriage, and they thought they could take it away from me just like that? No. They needed to learn. They needed to suffer. I had to make them regret ever thinking they could betray me. The next morning, I left the house under the guise of visiting a friend. Instead, I went to the outskirts of town, to a place people only whispered about. The house was small, old, and surrounded by tall trees that swayed in the wind like they had secrets of their own. I knocked once, and the door creaked open. An old woman stood there, her piercing eyes studying me as if she already knew why I had come. "You have been wronged, my child," she said after a long pause. "Do you want justice or revenge?" I met her gaze, my heart steady. "Both." She nodded slowly and stepped aside, letting me in. The air inside was thick with the scent of burning herbs, the walls lined with shelves filled with bottles of strange powders and liquids. She led me to a wooden table and sat across from me. "Tell me everything." And I did. I told her about James, about his brothers, about their plan to throw me away like garbage. When I finished, she studied me for a moment before reaching for a small pouch. She placed it in my hands, her voice calm but firm. "Sprinkle this where they gather to eat and wait. When the time is right, their betrayal will become their downfall." I clutched the pouch tightly, feeling its weight in my palm. What will happen to them? She smiled faintly. They will suffer the consequences of their actions. Their own wickedness will consume them. A chill ran down my spine, but I felt no fear. Only anticipation. I thanked her and left, returning home just in time to prepare dinner. As I stirred the pot of soup, I carefully sprinkled the powder, making sure it dissolved completely. Then I served them their meal, watching as they ate heartily, completely unaware of what was coming. The first sign came that night. James tossed and turned in his sleep, muttering incoherently. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he gasped for breath. I sat up, watching him silently. His body jerked violently, and then suddenly he bolted upright, eyes wide with terror. She was here, he whispered, his voice trembling. She was standing over me, smiling, but her eyes were red. I reached out, touching his arm. Who, James? Who did you see? He looked at me, his face pale. You. A shiver ran through him and he buried his face in his hands. Across the hall I heard Richard scream. A door slammed open, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. David appeared in the doorway, his face ghostly white. Something is wrong, he choked out. I saw her too. I tilted my head. Saw who? Richard stumbled in, shaking his head violently. No, this isn't real. This isn't happening. But it was. And it was only the beginning. It started slowly. At first they thought it was just nightmares, harmless illusions of the mind. But as the days passed, the dreams became more vivid, more terrifying. James would wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, clutching at his chest as if something unseen was pressing down on him. Richard became paranoid, flinching at every shadow, his hands trembling even when he held a glass of water. David, the one who used to mock me the most, stopped laughing altogether. His eyes were sunken, dark circles forming under them as if he hadn't slept in days. They never spoke about it directly, but I could see it in their faces. The fear. The doubt. The realization that something was very, very wrong. One evening I watched as they sat in the living room, silent, restless. James kept rubbing his temples, Richard stared blankly at the floor, and David muttered under his breath, rocking slightly. It was a beautiful sight. They were breaking, slowly unraveling before my very eyes. I walked in carrying a tray of tea, my face the picture of concern. You all look so tired, I said softly, setting the tray down. Is everything all right? James looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. I don't know what's happening, Sarah, he whispered. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I sat beside him, placing a gentle hand on his. You're just stressed, my love. Maybe you need some rest. He flinched at my touch. I pretended not to notice. That night it got worse. James screamed in his sleep, thrashing violently. I lay beside him, unmoving, watching. His breath came in ragged gasps, his fingers clawing at the sheets. Then suddenly he bolted upright, his eyes wide in terror. She was here, he choked out. She was standing at the foot of the bed, watching me. I frowned, tilting my head. Who, James? He looked at me, his face pale. You. Across the hall I heard Richard scream. A door slammed open, followed by hurried footsteps. David appeared in the doorway, his face ghostly white. Something is wrong, he choked out. I saw her too. Richard stumbled in, shaking his head violently. No, this isn't real. This isn't happening. But it was. And it was only the beginning. The next morning I found them huddled together in the living room, whispering urgently. Their eyes darted around the room, their hands twitching. When I walked in they fell silent, their expressions wary. Good morning, I greeted them cheerfully. Did you all sleep well? None of them answered. James just stared at me, his jaw clenched. I sighed, picking up an empty glass from the table. You all should eat something. I'll make breakfast. As I walked away I felt their eyes on my back, heavy with suspicion. They were starting to question things. Good. That night I decided to push them further. I stood outside their bedroom doors, whispering their names softly, just loud enough to be heard but not enough for them to pinpoint where it was coming from. I scratched lightly against the wood, giggling under my breath. I heard the rustling of sheets, the sharp intake of breath. Then James's voice, trembling. Did you hear that? David muttered something but I couldn't make out his words. Richard swore under his breath. I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing. The next morning, James announced that he was bringing in a priest. This house is cursed, he muttered, his hands shaking as he rubbed his forehead. Something is wrong. I hid my smile behind my cup of tea. Let him bring whoever he wanted. It wouldn't change anything. The priest arrived later that afternoon, a quiet man with kind eyes. He walked through the house, murmuring prayers, sprinkling holy water in every room. I stood in the doorway watching. He paused when he reached me, his gaze lingering on my face. I smiled. He turned to James. There is something dark here, he said carefully. Something unsettled. Have you done anything to invite this? James shook his head quickly. No, of course not. We've done nothing wrong. I nearly laughed. Nothing wrong? Oh, how little he knew. The priest sighed. Then I will continue the prayers. But I suggest you all reflect. Sometimes the evil we face is of our own making. James looked away, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. That night the nightmares turned into reality. James woke up gasping, clutching his throat. I couldn't breathe, he choked out. Something was holding me down. Richard stood by the window staring outside, his face pale. I saw someone, he whispered. She was standing in the garden. Watching us. David sat in the corner of the room, rocking back and forth, his hands clutching his hair. I can't take this. I can't take this anymore. I watched them, silent, waiting. They were unraveling. Breaking apart. Soon they would beg to leave. And I would let them. But not yet. Not until they truly understood what it meant to betray me. The house was no longer theirs. They could feel it. It was in the air, thick with tension, pressing against them like an unseen force. James, Richard, and David moved through the rooms cautiously, their eyes darting to every shadow, every dark corner. They barely spoke anymore. The once lively house, filled with their laughter and secretive whispers, had become a place of dread. And I watched it all, unseen, unnoticed, a quiet storm waiting to strike. James barely slept. When he did, he would wake up gasping for air, his hands clawing at his throat as if invisible fingers were squeezing the life out of him. Richard would sit by the window all night, staring out as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. David, once the boldest of them all, had become a shell of himself, whispering prayers under his breath, rocking back and forth in his chair. Their suffering was delicious. But I was not done. One evening as I prepared dinner, I noticed the way they hesitated before eating. Their hands shook as they lifted their spoons, their eyes shifting toward me when they thought I wasn't looking. I smiled. You're not eating much these days, I said softly, setting a loaf of bread on the table. Are you feeling unwell? James flinched. We're fine, he muttered. Richard cleared his throat, pushing his plate away. I'm not hungry. David's hands trembled as he set down his spoon. Me neither. I tilted my head, my smile never fading. That's a shame. I made your favorite, James. He didn't respond. Instead he pushed his chair back, rising abruptly. I need some air. Richard and David followed, their footsteps hurried. As soon as they left, I chuckled under my breath. They were breaking, unraveling piece by piece. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. That night I stepped outside and stood beneath the moonlight, whispering softly. The wind carried my words through the air, weaving them into the fabric of the night. Inside the lights flickered. A chair scraped against the floor. Then James screamed. I walked back in slowly, finding him in the living room, his hands clutching his head. She's here, he gasped. She's in the house. Richard backed into a corner, his face ashen. I saw her too, he whispered. She was standing by the stairs. Watching us. David whimpered. I can't do this. I can't stay here. James turned to me, desperation in his eyes. Sarah, you have to believe me. Something is wrong with this house. I met his gaze, my expression calm. Is it the house? I asked softly. Or is it you? His breath hitched. He looked away. Richard's hands clenched into fists. David let out a broken sob. They knew. Deep down they knew. This wasn't about the house. This was about them. Their guilt. Their betrayal. And now it was consuming them. The next morning James made a decision. We need to leave, he announced, his voice hollow. All of us. Richard nodded quickly. Yes. We should go. This place, it's cursed. David was already packing his things. I don't care where we go. I just want out. I watched them, my heart swelling with triumph. They thought they could throw me away like I was nothing. They thought they could take my home, my life, and replace me without consequence. But now they were the ones running. They were the ones begging to escape. As they rushed to gather their belongings, I stood in the doorway watching them with a serene smile. "Leaving so soon?" I asked. James hesitated, gripping the suitcase handle tightly. "We don't have a choice, Sarah." I nodded slowly. "I suppose not." As they stepped outside, the wind howled, the sky darkening as if the house itself was bidding them farewell. I followed them to the gate, stopping just at the threshold. "One more thing," I called out. They turned, their faces weary, afraid. I met James's gaze, my smile widening. "You will never escape what you've done," I whispered. "It will follow you wherever you go." James swallowed hard. Richard's hands shook. David refused to look at me. And with that they left. I turned back toward the house, stepping inside as the door creaked shut behind me. The silence was comforting, familiar. This was my home. And now it was mine again. I walked through the empty halls, feeling the weight of my victory settle around me. They thought they had won. But in the end they had only destroyed themselves. And I had made sure of it. As I stood in the center of the living room, the shadows seemed to whisper around me, a quiet chorus of satisfaction. I had done something strange. Something wicked. And I had won.